everyone. I'm Yasmin Hussain, and I'm the continent correspondent for Montessori Voices for Montessori Everywhere. And I am delighted to bring you my interview today with Zainab Shamis-Saleem. Zainab is a mother of two small children. She's the founder of the Montessori Studio, and she offers online courses and does consultations for parents. She's also a qualified Montessori teacher of 10 years now, and she's currently working in a preschool in London. And there's just lots more that Zainab has to tell us about her wisdom and insights from working in the Montessori world and beyond. Hi, Zainab.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
It's so nice to have you on here and to talk about your story and to just share all your pearls of wisdom. So I wanted to just jump straight in and just ask
Sure.
you to tell us a little bit about your Montessori journey. Just to give everyone a little bit of background, Zainab and I know each other because when I started my Montessori journey, I approached Zainab online and had lots of questions about how to become a Montessori teacher. And Zainab so kindly gave me lots of advice, and yeah, and we connected from there. So yeah,
Mm.
could you tell us a bit about your journey, Zainab, and how did you always know you wanted to be a Montessori teacher?
Well, no, I graduated with a graphic design degree, and I went straight into magazine and publishing in an agency in London straight after university, and I was there really happily. I had a wonderful um, few years in an agency, um, and when I was 25, I moved to South Africa for a year. My mother's family are from there, and I just took a bit of a year out, but I went in to try out some film production, and I was kind of at the stage of wanting to see what more I could do. I had done a bit of art direction, and so I actually come from an arts background. I went to art school, and then I did graphic design, and then when I was away, it gave me the time to sort of reflect, and I think I felt that I had just become a bit burnt out, I think, by deadlines, and I was only in my early 20s, and I was really I had become accustomed to having constant deadlines and really working many hours and not really resting myself very well. So when I was away, I just took a bit of time out, and had lots of chats with lots of wonderful people, and it gave me the time to sort of think, like, what do I actually like and what am I actually really good at, because I was not really a very good graphic designer. I really enjoyed being there, but I'm quite terrible. And I so when I was away, um, I remember going to an incredible art teacher who was doing evening lessons for adults, and I just observed her, and I thought, gosh, teaching just feels so great. I would love to do this, and I've always felt that I'd wanted to do some sort of arts teaching. And then when I think I spoke to my mum, and my mum said, you've always been really good with children, and if you have your own children, you'll be able to have my, my her priorities were like holidays and you'll always have work. She was like, you'll always have work, and I thought, well, okay, that does sound like. But I was nowhere near having children. I hadn't met my husband. I was completely single and not in any mind frame to have children. So when I came back to London, I just spoke to my brother's children's school, and which was a Montessori, and my sister-in-law said, they're amazing, you should speak to them because they're really amazing. And when I went to speak to them, they then directed me to Montessori Centre International, so MCI, which has slightly changed now, but at the time it was in just near Bond Street, their offices and teaching college. And I was just blown away. I'd never been in a classroom set up in a Montessori way. I'd never heard teachers speaking about children in such a uh, kind of holistic and fair way. I had a very happy schooling, but in a regular school, and but it really corresponded to how I was brought up, and it really felt very much in line with how I I thought of children as well. So I enrolled to start in 2011 to do evening classes, and I thought, I'll do this when I've got kids. This is just a hobby thing. I'm just doing this because I'm interested in it. And within about 3 weeks, I was like, I've got to quit my job. How am I going to quit my job and do this? Because I just want to do this. I was just so blown away by how beautiful it was, and how, I suppose, the design part of me was just so taken by the aesthetic of a Montessori classroom. It's just so pleasing to the eye, and the materials are so beautifully designed. The design part, I think, really hooked me. And once I started my course, I loved it. I would sort of dash out of work every night, every like 2 nights a week, to head across town to get to Bond Street. And I met really wonderful people. So I think in 2012, I handed in my notice at my job, and I said, I'm going to work as a Montessori teacher. And it meant that I had to move back in with my mum. I think I'd already moved back in with my mum by then, but I needed to, it required me to take like a hit on the money because I was going back to basics. It required me to like suddenly be studying a lot after a long time of not really doing any study. So it took a bit of time and a bit of adjustment, but the school were incredible. And it was a school in East London. It was my brother's children's school in East London. They said, come and do your training with us, that's fine. And through them, I qualified and just continued on. And then I worked in another school when I then moved to West London when I got married, and worked there for a while. And while I was there, I started to feel like I was getting a lot of questions from the parents about their children. Like, what are they doing? I don't understand any of the materials we're paying. And I thought, they're paying so much money. They don't really know what they're doing. Why don't they know what they're doing? I really was intrigued by this thing of like the parents asking me about their child. And I was sort of like, there's some disconnect here with how you feel empowered with your own child. So I left, and I was like, right, I'm going to set up a business, and this is going to be my business and Montessori studio. And alhamdulillah, I fell pregnant with my daughter. So it just stopped before it began. And I had started childminding, which was great because I actually could do that with my daughter all the way until I was pregnant with my son. So the childminding was good. And I did a bit of homeschool tutoring as well, Montessori, while I was kind of like 6 months pregnant. And I was sort of really, really wanted to like pursue, but the world works in ways that we can't plan. So I just had to go with it. So I set up the Montessori studio in 2015, but I didn't really get it going until the beginning of 2019. And that was when a really good friend of mine said, you should really do some workshops because lots of things about Montessori. And I'd always read around the subject, and I'd always kind of kept up to date with things that were going on. So that's kind of where the Montessori studio began, really, I suppose. And then I went from school to school and then had children. So it wasn't really planned, but thankfully now I feel like the Montessori studio is quite established, and I now have written a few online courses last year, and have now run some consulting, like one-to-one consulting, which works around my family and my children and that kind of thing.
That's wonderful, Zainab, and it's so lovely to hear your journey and about all the different things that you worked in terms of Montessori teaching after your training, and then you went into consultations with parents and workshops and setting up the Montessori studio and doing many things with that. Do you think, are there like some things in your training that you remember today that kind of lessons, I suppose, that really was kind of a bit of a light bulb moment, would you say, from your training?
I mean, I feel like my whole training was kind of like, wow, this is incredible. Why don't we do this? I really felt moved. Like, why? But then I had this insight into this whole world where they do this, and all these teachers are training this, but I kind of was like, why have I never really come across this before? And how is this such a, like, I really felt I really, really felt strongly that this was a life-changing approach to children. And I remember doing my training and then coming out of my classes and then looking at people going, were you a Montessori child? Were you a Montessori child? You know, you could almost apply it then to adults. And it was that kind of that that kind of like longevity of the benefit which really moved me, because not only were the areas of learning so wide and broad and encompassed, you know, everything, but specifically had a like a nice like plan and a approach to it. I think the organization really appealed to me. It must be something within me, because I was never that much of an organized person, and I never thought I would ever be, but it really sang to me. And I've been so inspired by the teachers. I've really felt that so they were so giving, and they were so committed to us as adults going into the classroom to then be to some degree like an agent of change in the classroom, or you know, that the striving for seeing the child in their best in their like best self was incredibly refreshing for me.
Yeah, I asked that because it just seems to be a lot of spiritual preparation, that what Maria Montessori talks about, that happens when a person is training in the school, when they're having that first kind of real lessons for themselves, going through that whole process before becoming a Montessori educator. So it's, yeah, it's
Yeah.
really lovely to hear that. I know you've done a lot of work as well on diversity, representation, with the Montessori Studio, and with a lot of things that you've written about. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Why is that
Yeah.
important?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm certainly not trained. You know, there are many, many wonderful people who are trained in diversity and inclusion and equality, and you know, I I'm not. So, but however, so my parents are from two different countries. We grew up in South London in a Muslim family, and I suppose I was a product of, you know, this kind of like global child thing where you are a different kind of child than your parents. So everyone's kind of having a new experience. My parents came here from abroad, and we navigated being different from everybody else here. And then whilst I was whilst I set up my workshops, very quickly it became clear that a lot of the people that were contacting me were really pleased to see a visibly Muslim woman, um, doing this kind of thing, and and they were very like hungry for more, because my workshops have um, obviously they're open to everyone, but a few of the places I was approached by were mainly covering the Muslim community. So whether in London or in Surrey or online, I've had people kind of really ask me from a Muslim point of view, or from a point of view of being a minority in this country. And as I say, I'm not qualified. However, um, just coming at it from that point of view and having an awareness about children for whom English might not be their first language, or for whom their religion is like the main approach in their life, and does Montessori work with religion, with Islam, or with a religious upbringing, and what does is Montessori at odds, like who's this Maria Montessori and why are we following her, as opposed to following the teachings of a religious text, or following the you know, who many people haven't really heard of her, surprisingly. So it it became that, and then I started working with Baby Chino Kids, which is an online international families website and blog, and I was asked to write a couple of blog posts a month about my point of view from a culturally diverse um, lens about childhood and bringing up children and what we do with Montessori. And that really was wonderful, because Baby Chino Kids at the time, I think, had a very wide reach, and it was really quite non-diverse. And I had been in talks with them, and they really were interested in having like a different kind of voice, and I was very interested in trying to be that different kind of voice. And so I started off chairing a panel on cultural diversity and how to bring up your children. Like, what do you choose out of your culture, and what if your partner's from a different culture, or the child's father or mother is from a different culture? How do you marry that, and what do you bring in, and what do you leave out, and how do you integrate the uh, the mainstream narrative into your home, and all these kinds of questions that people for whom this is not their this might be their birth country, but this is not their like ancestral home, would have questions about food and traditions and celebrations and holidays and uh, cultural dress and language. And so yeah, so that was really great actually, and I met like lots of people through that. And then so I wrote for them, and I wrote for a magazine called Islamic Montessori, which is actually run and completely headed by my first ever Montessori teacher who taught me, and she runs Rumi Montessori, and it was her training was kind of excellent. And then so I've just written like I've recently written an article for Neo Montessori magazine, which is based in Nigeria, about educating people on Montessori in the African continent. So there's it certainly hasn't been a deliberate pathway in terms of work, but sometimes how you present leads the direction you go in, because it's how people take you. And I only started covering my hair about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I wasn't I had took a long time to identify with being a visibly Muslim woman. However, I've had thankfully very like positive response and reaction, and I felt very empowered doing that. So it's allowed me to do more. So I did a bit of consulting work with Lady Chino after last summer's kind of movements upon race and Black Lives Matter and things like that. Not again, not from a Black person's point of view, clearly, but from just as an advice point of view as to how and where to get that kind of information, how to ensure that you have some level of representation in your work, and where to go. But that obviously required me to do a lot of my own work and research. And so that was great. Actually, it was great for me because it really pushed me to like another level of saying, well, I might not, sometimes you don't necessarily put yourself forward as being representative of A, B, or C, but if somebody sees you as being reflective of them, which is kind of the beauty of representation, actually there's a responsibility there to follow it through, even if you feel out of your depth and you feel like it's not really my lane. Well, if somebody requires that of you, from my point of view, that level of service requires you to do the work and actually go there. You might have to have, you got to like widen your reading, you've got to widen your circles, you've got to like ensure that your practice and your process is representative if somebody's expecting that of you in a way. But as I say, it's very, I learn from a lot of other people, and I just I try not to be too representative, because I also need to, you know I suppose there's a fear, isn't there, of getting anything wrong. So you always have to like kind of swallow your worries and just move on with it. So yeah, that's how that kind of thing came about.
That's really interesting to see how those opportunities arose for you and how you got to be more involved in that work because of that. Do you feel Montessori kind of gave you a way to talk about those things more in terms of the early years and in terms of education for children, and really sort of look at those issues through a Montessori lens?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really struck me about the Montessori approach, was the inclusivity of the attitudes, and I think that's different from the atmosphere of the schools, because the attitudes of the Montessori approach and Maria Montessori's work, when you go back to her basic work, is very, very um, uh, it's very aware and kind to difference. And I think we can often always have the global north as our pinpoint of what a child should do or should be. When you're 4 years old, you should be doing this or this or this. Or what, well, when you're 6 years old, have you had or played with this toy, or have you had this toy? And I think that's a very Western global north approach. And I was very taken because it spoke to me as someone who came from a Muslim home. My parents were from the African continent, and I sometimes when I grew up, I didn't really feel that mainstream voice reflected me. That wasn't how our childhood necessarily was at home. So, um, she worked in India, she worked abroad, and obviously her teachings, Maria Montessori's teachings went to the States, went far and wide. But her work, when you go to her books, which are really heavy going but incredibly rich, and I find are usually the point that I go to for the when I'm lacking inspiration. It's like back to the basics of her real, well, they're not basic at all, they're incredibly complex, but her work and her speeches or her talks or her thoughts, it's very it always transcends that kind of thing, and it goes deep into what we call, in I suppose in the Muslim culture, the fitra, which is like your most natural self. It's the self which is not comparative to anybody else, and it's the most, I suppose in Montessori you call it your normalized child or your normalized self. So I felt like there was a real like reflection there from me. I really resonated with that point of view. So I really I've found that from the Montessori lens, it's really easy to work with that point of view. However, obviously, there's another discussion about Montessori schools in this country, which are expensive, privatized, and have a kind of air of being elitist, really, which I think is unfair to the amount of work that Montessori teachers and parents and adults put in. However, it's real, it really does feel that they're not that accessible. And but I think that's down to the people. And I think that's down to the governmental, like top-down approach about not really giving more money to subsidize costs so that it's Montessori education accessible. But this is like a big discussion about the schooling in this country, which could do with a bit of an overhaul from my point of view.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I know you and I were just discussing this as well about, making Montessori more accessible. It's a big part of your work as well, and trying to help parents who do think it's elitist and show them that there is a way to do it without being like that and without having to spend lots of money. Something that Montessori Everywhere I know is working on as well, trying to make Montessori accessible
Yeah,
for everyone
absolutely.
and everywhere. So it's I wanted to just go on and ask you about that. How do you see Montessori in the future? How do you see things evolving, and with equality and the injustices that we've been touching upon? Do you kind of see things getting better in the short term, or do you think it's going to take a while for us to really sow those seeds of justice? And
Yeah, I think when you talk about, I think there's a difference in talking about children in this country, and then there's a difference about talking about children, because like I say, that very um, global north child is taken to be the standard of what children are or should have or should do. And actually, children across the world have always been, since time began, completely different from each other, as adults are completely different. But there are some things which are globalizing childhood, like the internet and advertising and money, and so a capitalist structure which does affect families and children very specifically. So I think there's do I think things will get better? I think there's a lot of there are so many ways of answering that question, because schooling is incredible in this country if you think about what schooling is like in other countries. However, there are a lot of children in this country who still suffer inequality, who are still have their families have financial barriers to good education. Staffing are not financially rewarded for the amount of work that they do. Um, so there are a lot of ways of answering that question, but I'm usually quite positive about how things are, and I usually feel that things are amazing to take the best of it, but it doesn't mean that you take your foot off the gas and you just say, well, everything's fine, so we'll just carry on being great, because I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think there's a lot in terms of, I suppose, empowering parents to make choices that are um, in the best interest of their child. And, for example, not having much support when you have a baby in this country, and statutory maternity leave, and then childcare being so incredibly expensive, and then all of a sudden at 4 years old you go to school for free. It's just, that's like a whole scandal in itself. It's so confusing because families are pushed to their limits when the children are young, which just doesn't make sense. Whereas some other European countries, you actually paid to stay at home so that you can look after your child. So I think there's a lot of, in that respect, I think there's a lot that can be done. And I think, but I'm also very, I have a very kind point of view to things like homeschool and things like state school. My daughter's in a state school, and I've been incredibly moved by how wonderful they've been. But I also am really inspired by homeschoolers. I'm always kind of wondering, should I be a homeschooler? But I'm not quite sure if I'm cut out for it. So I think things are what you make of them, and the best, you can always get the best of things, but this doesn't mean that there's less energy to make things better or to affect a positive change. So yeah, I definitely think the onus should be on, services and local government and government to ensure that things are better. However, I think that every parent can also take the best of things, and their children usually want for very little. They just want and need to be heard and loved and spend time with and attention. So yeah, I'm usually quite like optimistic about the future of Montessori.
I love your optimism, and and you've touched on so many points about how Montessori can be improved in so many different ways. And you've also I like how you've linked it to early years and kind of helping parents and mothers to to actually have that time to actually for them to have that child, because as you say, in other countries they do have better systems, and we could really do with working on that over here, certainly. So I just wanted to ask you, do you think of it as like quite a divide with the Montessori community and the non-Montessori community? And you kind of see this as a big issue that needs to be worked on, that we need to kind of find a way to bring these two together in terms of education?
Well, I really feel that um I think parents who send their kids to Montessori schools are like all power to them. Like, I also did send my daughter to a Montessori nursery, and usually it's not the parents. It whoever can get the best education for their child will take that. And if you have a great Montessori down the road from you, then wonderful. But if you have a great Montessori 15 miles from you, and it costs thousands of pounds for you to send your child there, it doesn't, you might want to be part of that community, but you just can't because of the barriers that are, in place. So I think that, I think that there is a divide, but I don't think there really needs to be a divide if the attitudes that Maria Montessori strove so hard to share are taken as like a given. There are so many Montessori nurseries because Montessori really works, and it really works for young children particularly, but it really works. But there are a lot of nurseries that aren't Montessori that use Montessori, so that's really good. Like, but then obviously that there are people who say you've not got to use Montessori correctly, and if it's not correct, then it's not really good. And but I think again, like you say, like there's this, is this divide really real, or can it be just broken down? I think everyone is just really trying their best to have the best for their kids and their, their families, and they just want, if they've got a great opportunity, then they'll take it. For example, when I went to school, I think there was 1 year out of all the years that my parents um got some subsidy for something, and it really made a difference for that year. But that bit of money, really made a difference to where that money could go elsewhere. And I think ultimately it kind of comes down to money, unfortunately, is the divide. So I don't think it's the community's fault. I don't think that there's the fault of the community. I think online can be quite confusing because there are so many amazing people doing wonderful things online with Montessori, and using Montessori to educate their children, or to create free content, or to create online courses, or to write books. I think that's amazing. But what it can do is it can leave the regular parent who just doesn't really know what they're doing, they're just trying their best, feel a bit dejected about, like, I don't really have all of these beautiful things, and I don't really have the money for them, and I don't really have the time to give my one child attention because I've got three, or I've got four, or I've got two, or I work full time, and I want to do more Montessori, but is it really worth it because I feel like I'm going to do it wrong? I think that's more divisive than the communities itself. I think everybody's like really wants the best, and but I think it's more about the fear of, sometimes Montessori can seem quite strict and stern if you don't do it in a certain way. And I don't think that that is necessarily how Montessori should or would be best applied, is feeling like it's got to be very, it's got to be done in a classroom, and you've got to have like these work cycles and da, da, da. But at home Montessori is completely different to that. So I think what's more divisive are the attitudes towards and judgments towards parenting and parenting choices, and I suppose what you can take from an approach and what you can leave.
How do you think we can break that down for parents to show them that it's not like that, that Montessori can be accessible for you? You can do it at home without going to a school or without, having all of these expensive materials.
I really don't know. How do you? I'd love for you to answer that question. I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, in my work, I have found it to be really productive to just be straight up and be like, you don't have to spend, like, one of the first things I usually say is, please don't go out and spend lots of money. If anything, just get some cardboard boxes and just pack everything away that you don't need for now, and then you can figure out what to do. But I think uh it can be, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm also trying to find out how I can best support parents who really want to do more, but they just don't know how. That is the work that I'm doing. Is I don't really know how. I'm really trying.
Yeah, I think it is a really tricky one, isn't it, as to how parents can do that at home and without having, especially when you see all these images on social media, and it can be really off-putting. But I think, yeah, there's so much in the Montessori philosophy for them to kind of take on and do without having to kind of invest in all these,
Yeah.
and I suppose, like, maybe as a community, like being a bit more in terms of sharing and trying to
Yeah,
find.
I have to say the Montessori online community, which I had never really been part of an online community before. I never really worked with online. When you work in schools,
It's
you're
completely.
much more about being in the classroom with,
Yeah.
so um I found the Montessori community to be incredible. They're amazing people. They're wonderfully kind and supportive, and this thing with online, which is all about sharing, so that everybody pushes each other up in the terms of like getting your projects out there or shared, or reaching an audience. I think the Montessori community have that like just down to a T. They're so helpful and kind, and it is a bonding thing. Like if you see that there's a new Montessori account or something, and you can just see that it's someone's, she's just starting out, or somebody's just documenting their work or their school, or I found that to be really inspirational, the level of kind of support. And actually, you know, I've definitely had those moments of being like, oh my gosh, that house has got these incredible printables. I don't even have printer ink right now. You know, I've got to buy a laminator. Oh my gosh, I need to buy I've got to buy all, and I totally get consumed with that kind of thing. And you're spending hours online, like looking for the right kind of tray. Does it have this kind of handle, or does it have this kind of handle? It's, that kind of thing can really, it can really be a time drain. But it's inspiring because it does hold a standard of work which can benefit. But that's why it's great, and I just find the Montessori community to be wonderful. But I have to be very clear with my online work that I'm not that kind of parent.
I think what's great about you is that you are true to what you are, and your journey is like reflected on there. And I love the way that your journey has taken you to now you're working in this preschool, and I'm really excited to hear about what you're going to go on and do. And how do you see that unfolding? Like, how do you see for yourself as a Montessori educator? How do you see things evolving for you and
Yeah.
your career?
Well, I'm actually uh, due to start a master's, inshallah, in October, which I did have to think quite carefully about, because I was like, should I do a Montessori, like a further Montessori qualification? Should I invest in that? And after a while of thinking, and actually, I'm taking it on childhood and youth international development, because I feel like, Montessori really speaks to the international issues around um, childhood, like legislation. And I feel also, since my work with the Montessori studio, one of the biggest things to me has been the like how little I can help further. Like I've had lots of parents and mothers particularly start off saying, I want to do more of Montessori, but I just don't know how. I really feel like I struggle with this and that at home, but I don't know how to do better. And by the time I finished an hour's conversation with them on the phone, the real issues are, I've got postnatal depression, I've got 4 children, I still haven't dealt with my first birth, which was really traumatic, I don't have any help, my partner or my in-laws are like not on board, or my family, we can't afford them. And so suddenly it's like, okay, there are a lot more issues here than I want my child to do Montessori activities at home. And, or we had a traumatic first year of my child's life, and uh, I want to do the best thing, but I'm so tired that I can't, I don't know how to do that. These are things which required more. And there was a time before last year, because I actually deferred. I was meant to start last year, my master's, but I deferred. Uh, when I just thought, I'm stumped. Like, I don't know. I feel like I feel a bit like it's just not enough. And people are coming to me, but I'm not able to give them what they need. I'm not. So that's what took me down to researching and looking into like further education. But that I don't know how I'm going to handle doing a master's, because it's been a long time since I've done that kind of study. So that for me, and also for my own work kind of trajectory, I love being in the classroom with children, and I really, really love working with the parents. But I think I don't know. Courses have been great as well. Um, Workshops are great. I think this, COVID time has like thrown a lot of spanners into all the work. So for now, I'm, I don't really know. As you've probably seen by how work has gone for me, I don't really plan that much. This summer I'll be with my children, hanging out in 100 parks probably over the summer, and I will probably just see how it goes. Like if a work opportunity comes up, I just take it kind of that way. I think, like as we said before, when you also have children, you're willing to do a lot more than you'd thought you would do, just so that you can be with them. And if that means I work in a non-Montessori setting, then so be it. If it means that my Montessori education and like and experience can better that space, or if I go and do a master's with people who are way more academic than I am and I just swim through it barely, then so be it. If it means that I could then, if I was to do some courses or workshops, I could actually provide further support, like family support. I think family support is like a big thing for me. Uh, I'm very lucky that I've had a lot of family support, but there are lots of people who don't have that kind of thing. And I think increasingly people have less, which is really hard, I think. Early, especially in the early years, family support in the early years is really hard. But I really don't know. I don't know how things will pan out. I just like put put them down on paper and see if it turns up.
Yeah, I think with your work and your experience, I can imagine that you've had a lot of parents come to you with all these different issues, and it's not so clear cut, is it, that someone just asks you about a Montessori material or what's this Montessori thing, and that's it, and you answer them. There's always so much more going on. Um, you know,
Yeah,
if it's emotions, if it's behavior problems to do with your children or yourself or um, myriad of things. It's not
yeah.
black and white.
No, exactly. And I think, it's exactly the same for Montessori schools, dealing with the children or any school, things are never black and white. You've got lots of, sensitive issues that need to be taken into consideration. You have to be really compassionate. And I suppose I'm at the stage now where I've done 10 years of work and I've had two children. And now I feel like I need to just do a bit more work. And I suppose it comes back to the spiritual preparation of the teacher, I suppose, that kind of, you go through phases of, have I, where am I at, self-reflecting, where do I need to be, where can I go, what's next, or where am I going, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that is yeah, I have no idea how it'll go, but I hope for the best, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's so exciting about your masters as well, and I can't wait to hear more about that. I was just going to go back and ask you about the work you did with Islamic Montessori, because I found that
Yeah,
really interesting as well, and especially for yourself as a Muslim woman and working as a Montessori educator and teacher. That how do you, what do you have to share with us about that, about the links with Islam and Montessori and the kind of, I guess I'm thinking spiritual preparation of the teacher. What do
yeah.
what do you think about that?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, again, I can only speak from personal, but my, I think I, I've I have felt most empowered when I have been in touch with my history and background and self, and family. You know, I've been most inspired when I've been able to harness what I am. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable because I grew up as one of about three children who are not white in my primary school. And I never really felt like I fitted into any of the minority groups at high school. I mean, I had wonderful friends, but it wasn't like I was A or B because I'm not. I'm half from here and half from there, and we live over here. And so, which I think a lot of people, not only in this country but around the world, will start to feel is this disconnect between, I don't have the same life as my mom, and I am swimming in my own life. But then I've got lots of friends, but none of us really have the same experience because we all have a different home life, and the cultural thing is so rich, and there's so much to take from it. So that it's a lot more about sharing the differences as opposed to when I was young, which was all like about who's the same. Everyone's the same, and there's a couple of children who look different. But now it's much more about everyone's different, and that's wonderful. So with Islamic Montessori, I mean, once I started looking into it, well, actually, my first school was a faith school. It was a Muslim school, and it was a Montessori nursery preschool. And even I was amazed at how in sync it was in terms of bringing in things which I'd never learned during my training. And I think that was a window. It was like, okay, so actually you can apply Montessori to your preferred belief system or life approach. It's not that Montessori is a way and you fit into that way. I feel that Montessori can be applied to your chosen lifestyle. If you homeschool, then great. If you flexi school, you can do it with that Montessori as well. If you travel all around the world and you have a teacher who teaches your children that as well, you can apply it that way. So I that was my experience of being of being in a Muslim space, even though I'm from a Muslim home. That was my first experience of being Muslim school. And learning Arabic. They had Arabic sandpaper letters. I mean, I don't think I even realized before then that you could make your own sandpaper letters. I just thought you buy it. It's that kind of thing about being, you can harness Montessori and then you can apply. And that was really great for me. So, and actually, it was through the teacher in that school that I then was approached to write a piece for Islamic Montessori. So I think, and I think I wrote in that magazine, I wrote a letter to parents who just weren't sure of what to do. I think it was more like I'm sure it was clearly like a letter to my younger self, probably, about, if you're just unsure, you don't know where to go, and you just, you can have, it will be okay. And you just do your best. Like, you don't have to have these strict limits and these specific things, and, these things which actually bring fear and anxiety into your practice. It's there to relax your muscles and relax your mind and relax your approach. And so, so that was really good. And I now feel like something that I never really felt before, which was really proud of being a Muslim woman. I really, it took a long time for me. When you grow up being a real minority, you start to code switch yourself. You are one thing one day with these people, and then you're something else another day with those people, and it's taken me a long time to feel like. But it's also, I'm very lucky to have a lot of supportive people around me. So I also, you take the best of how it is. But yeah, I'm very glad to be part of an Islamic Montessori community. I think it's great.
I think that's great, and that you had that experience in your preschool, which I'm guessing was your first job.
Yes, my first job, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that now we are seeing more of that, like more of a kind of integration, with Islam and other philosophies, with Montessori as well, and kind of a more kind of showing people that, you can kind of marry the two and you can find similar concepts. So, as you were saying, like Montessori is a way that can be applied to other areas. Do you think we're seeing more of that now, or do you think kind of it was just different back then when you were working, when you had just trained and qualified?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I think it comes down to the teachers. I think the training is changing. The
Mm.
training is more inclusive. The training is more compassionate to the teachers, the adults' experiences, and that's what you step into the classroom. I remember, I can't remember whether it was, I think it was my training. It was like, you just take a few seconds before you enter the door and just relieve yourself of anything you have, so that you can step in as a clean slate for the day for those children when you come into a school, as opposed to being like, I'm late and my children were crying in the morning and I'm all flustered, and you step at the door, you come into the classroom with that energy, and that energy is so quickly translated to the children in a classroom. But yeah, it is something about, you can it can be applied, and I think that it's from the training point of view. I mean, yeah, I was trained by wonderful teachers who've had really wonderful experiences. So I did have that kind of training. But I suppose what I'm seeing in schools in general, not only my school that I work in or the schools that I've worked in, but my daughter's school or other people's school, is that there's much more of a conversation about multiculturalism, and there are more books. I mean, I never had any books when I was young. I don't know about you, but I never had any books about,
Yeah.
there was no one in a book that looked like me ever.
No. Yeah. I don't
And if they,
remember.
yeah, I can't even remember if there was ever, there were no toys that were representative. There was, so I think, they're very lucky, they're very, like, quite jealous of the children now that have access to this real beautifully, like, beautifully woven spaces that are really tailored to them. I think it's great.
It really is great. I think with Black Lives Matter as well, it's kind of really brought out so much more work towards this diversity and inclusivity. And we're sort of like seeing that on all scales and, for Muslims, Asians, and kind of really trying to get more representation of those cultures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame really
Mm,
that it has taken uh, a lot of really tragic things. I think that's really sad. I think that's really hard to take, is
yeah.
that it has come about through, like, this sort of watching and outplaying of a lot of really, really terrible things happening across the world, particularly in the States and here, like the UK has got a lot to answer for. So it's always quite bittersweet, I think. And BLM was not just like last year. I think that there's a big history behind it, and then there's a lot of history behind that, and there's a lot of history. I think the history of anti-racist education in this country goes back decades, and I would urge anyone to go into that and have a look into that, especially if you're a Montessori practitioner, because anti-racist attitudes are incredibly rife in this country. And from that point of view, I suppose my optimism is a bit like less optimistic. I'm less, because there's, my children are of mixed heritage, and I already am trying to think clearly about how we're going to tackle that. The stats don't lie, and it's really worrying. It's especially if you're in a London, or it's worrying about children and how they are, from being kind of not reflected in a nursery, could literally lead a trajectory to being excluded at 16. I think that's very important, that I think nursery can, preschool can always be like happy and friendly, but actually it's incredibly important that it's taken as part of the child's experience in this world, and how, if that is negative, maybe the child's come from a family that's experienced racism, or a family that's experienced injustice, or it can really translate. There can be some real intergenerational traumas. There can be lots of events which lead up to other very hard things, and I think that kind of support is really lacking, and it's very serious, I think, in this country. So yeah, from that point of view, I think it's good that there are these conversations happening. It's a kind of a shame that it's taken a long time, and it still needs to be really unpicked as to whether it's authentic. So that's, I think, still to play for, really. I think there's a responsibility on everyone to really try to strive for that kind of education to be to be thorough and to be deep.
I agree with you. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, in terms of Eurocentric education and really working on sowing these seeds. It's definitely not going to happen overnight. And as you say, it's been a long time coming already. So I think these things are definitely going to, but talking about them and just, I think it's so important, just kind of keep going with it. I just wanted to ask you about any stories you might like to share about working with the universal child and the child, of their time, place, and culture. Anything that comes to mind that, you might like to share as we're coming towards the end of the interview?
Yeah, I mean, uh, I think, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I've always really loved being in the classroom with children. I find that it's always very um, growing, and very light-hearted and very warm, and there's like a lot of love. I think, a classroom, if you ever feel like, if you even if you have a bad day at home, you get into the class within an hour, like, it's really funny. They're really funny, and it's really, so I don't know, the universal child is, I mean, pretty broad, I suppose. I'm trying to think if I've got any stories. I suppose I probably not like specific stories. It's just the atmosphere that comes with like being with children. I think is really something that you can't replicate elsewhere. It's very special. They really are more of the teacher when you're in a classroom, and they really break you down. So you can really. I remember in my first school, I really struggled with this authority, thing. And I'd really like try really hard to not have a very like stern voice. But I mean, my tone was completely off, like it would be condescending and it would be unfair and unkind. And I remember someone else's child, who was probably about 7 or 8, said, "She sounds angry, but she's not saying angry words." And I remember feeling really embarrassed that that child had already sussed my irritated tone. And uh, it's I often remember feeling like they can suss you out, like, the children can suss you out a mile away. So you've got to be authentic, otherwise you're going to come out with your tail between your legs, really. And it took me a long time, and I still struggle, I suppose, with my tone with people and with children. I've been told as well that that's something that I really like have to work on. So I sometimes, even in my classroom, I have to, if I say something out loud, I then have to say it again out loud in a different way, because it can be, you might be saying like, "Sit down everybody," but if you're like, "Sit down everybody," it just, they're all kind of start looking at you like, "What have we done? Haven't we done?" And then you realize that it's your stuff that's coming out, it's your thing. They don't, none of the children really deserve to have any of your stuff put on them, projected. And that's, I suppose, that's what the universal child, I suppose, teaches me constantly, is that you're always like, you're always in you're always in a student mode, because they're like teacher mode in a way, because they are so straight and they're so in their best self, that you actually come in as the teacher, but you immediately become the student of their behavior. I've always found that relationship to be really quite something special. But I
I
should get
love
some more stories. I should get definitely some more funny stories.
Oh, I love that, Zainab, because I think that's a really perfect nugget of wisdom, because I think, it's like we're really a mirror for children, and, you sort of go in and it's like suddenly everything's projected back onto you,
Yeah,
the whole thing about the children teaching us, it's really powerful. Yeah.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, I've had lots of, I've loved working with the children I've worked with, and you really become attached. You really, really feel, like, well, I'm at this stage of the school year where they start calling you mummy, and then they're like, "Oh, I didn't mean to call you that." And actually, it's very sweet, because it's so becomes so warm and so familiar, because you're with them all day, every day. And the teacher is the person who's with them sometimes more than the parent. So it's quite a special place to be. And I remember calling my teacher mummy, and they'd be like, "Oh, sorry," but they're like, it's always very funny. It's always quite a sweet moment when they do that. So
that's lovely. How do you find the difference with, I think, being a parent, just thinking of you as a mum with your children, just, very similar to me, and then working with children in the classroom? Is it kind of in some ways easier to, to kind of to
I've
be
just on cue, my children have just come in.
I thought as much.
um, I It's completely different. it's
You'd say that.
I think my husband once said, like, you did start off being like, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it like this, and the children are going to be like this, and this. And then, and actually, it's like not like that at all. And we always laugh about that now. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I just thought that that's how parenting was that it would be an extension of my teaching, but it's not at all. It's kind of like, I often feel like I've been through a washing machine by the end of the day, and it's just like you're just exhausted by the energy. I mean, it's like, there's nothing quite like parenting. But even before I had children, and I've always been very aware of, uh, I think teaching is not just about being a parent. I think that can be really confusing, or having children in your life. I mean, my brother started having children when I was 17. So I used to take my brother's kids out in a buggy and like pretend to be mum, when I was like 19 years old. And so I think even you don't even need to be maternal to be a teacher. I think, I think you don't even need to be maternal to have a child, to be honest. You can, I think that feeling maternal comes in waves, and but it's I mean, it's totally different. I like being a parent is the biggest ride you've ever been on. It's just it never ends. It's like the relentlessness of it. There's so many hurdles of which I'm like, I can't do this anymore, and I can't do that anymore, and we can't do this anymore. And then the next day comes and you do it all over again, and you think, well, I probably can actually. I've got a lot of my energy levels. You can do a lot on a very little amount of energy. You can get energy from different places. I remember speaking to someone when my first child was very young, and I was like, I'm just so tired, and they were like so like non-sympathetic. They said, okay, you need to stop talking about how tired you are, because that's not going to change, and at some point you will not be tired anymore. And it just was like, oh, I was so stuck in like feeling like the tiredness was the main driver of any kind of experience, because I was so tired. But actually, you push through these like invisible barriers in your parenting, and then I think the other thing is that I have lamented the time passing, but it's so painful to feel like, oh, they're not going to be a baby anymore. No. But then you realize the next stage is so amazing. You feel a bit better about, okay, and it makes you, I think it makes you, for me, as my children get older, it pushes me to be more present, because you can never get that time back. So you spend more time just enjoying all the like madness, and then you take it for what it is. And if things don't work out as you've expected, that's fine. If the day doesn't work out, there they are. You it's actually driven me to be more present, but it took experience. I couldn't have been present when I had them very young, because I didn't really know how to be present. It was all about, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. Should it be this? That comparative thing about always having other voices telling you how it should or shouldn't be. So now I just ignore all the other voices.
Oh, we can hear all the little voices there. Yeah, I mean, I think just to like, lastly, I just wanted to say, do you feel like yourself as a Montessori educator and, as a Muslim, and, do you feel like that's really helped to bring things into your parenting in terms of techniques and, sort of inspiration and so on?
Yeah, I do. I really feel very very much at peace with having something in my armory which has some guidance as to how to do this. But I've also, I've been incredibly inspired by other women. I mean, I'm incredibly inspired by you with 3 children, moving house, and I'm often inspired by other women who do things in many different ways than me, with more Islamic education or less Islamic education, more outdoors time, less outdoors time, all kinds of things. And that I find really drives me, because it shows me how it can be done, and then you can choose to do it. Like I say, I don't listen to the voices, but what I mean is you can take the best of things and make it work out for you. And apply it to your parenting. I mean, they're so forgiving, you know, the children. They're just so forgiving. You can, every day's a new day, every hour's a new hour, you know, and they can do like a lot more than you think. So sometimes I think, you know, I don't want to push this on them with their Islamic education. You know, that idea of pushing the religion, which I think we all grew up with, is like, don't push the religion on your child in case, or any religion, in case they ignore it completely and go the other way. You know, it's like this kind of mad approach to parenting, which is like, don't do A in case they do B, but then when they're older expect them to be A, B and C. You know, it's like,
Yes.
whereas now you know, they take whatever they want to, and I do what, as much as I can. I try to, and sometimes I don't as well. But you know, it's inspiring to see other parents doing a lot with their children, and their children really thriving with uh, their family's belief system. I think that's something very special. Is having, and I don't mean just Islam. You know, I think there's all kinds of families' belief systems, or all kinds of family setups, or all kinds of approaches. And I think just if you are doing it authentically, even if your children ignore you for years, at least you feel like, well, fulfilled. I
Yeah.
think sometimes you can do it for the children. I think we mentioned as well, the focus on the children is so high
Yeah.
that the worry and anxiety about them doing it. But am
Mm.
I really being authentic about this? Like, is it really what I want to do? Is this really how I want to live? And then it usually works out in the end.
Yeah. There's a lot of expectations, isn't there? And I think just have to do what's best for your family and stick
Yeah.
to that, really, isn't it? It's going to like be so.
Sometimes just do what's best for yourself, because you can't always, you can't. And I think being your child, being a witness to you as a parent, fulfilling yourself is such a special thing,
Mm,
because they
agree.
you don't need to talk. That's the role modeling thing, I suppose, in the Montessori. But you don't need to say or do. You don't need to say, this is how we do it. If you're doing it, you know, I suppose for me it would be practical things like prayer, or like rituals or fasting or things like that, but also like not so practical things like attitudes and how I see myself, self-belief, self-love, all those kinds of things. I can see it very quickly translates to them easily,
Mm.
and then it becomes an atmosphere.
Yeah, that's really great. And obviously it's a great example because we're in Ramadan right now. And,
Yeah,
it's like easy to just read some books to the children, which we do, which is nice, about Ramadan and fasting, but actually them just seeing what you're doing and the rituals, and seeing, the breaking of fast and the waking up, and is what they really ask questions about, what they're really kind of taking on so much
yeah,
more than what a book can explain to them,
yeah.
really.
I mean, when I grew up, there were no books. There were, I think there might have been one or two books I never read, but it was about like, okay, I might wake up in the night and hear my dad like praying downstairs, or, my mum would suddenly, we'd have like, we'd go to the cash and carry and buy like so much food, and there would be, it, it was just watching this difference of rhythm says so much about people's, like my family's, my parents' motivations. And then you start to see that they're motivated by deep spiritual pulls, or deep things which align them. That's so that's so inspiring. It's so amazing to watch someone else be deeply aligned and then follow that direction in anything, in sports or in health or in work or professional life or anything.
Absolutely.
It's like watching somebody sleep. they're so they're so in it that you're just like, I wish I could be asleep as well, like that. When you watch someone sleep peacefully, it's that's they don't say, this is how I sleep peacefully. What I do is they just sleep peacefully, and then you then have some kind of way of seeing how it is going to be for you. And I think it's the same with them. They hang on in a minute. So I think, you then it's the same with children, it's the same with even with not with children, even with adults. But watching somebody be deeply aligned because they've done their work can inspire you to find your alignment and then to have that self-fulfillment. Because at the end of the day, you're not there, your children are not there for you as much as every mother would just cry. They're not there for you, even though you feel like you want them to only be there for you. They're not.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but it's true. So yeah, I think that's something that I really find quite amazing, is that they push me to be more aligned for myself. Because the expectation upon them is almost unfair. It's almost unfair to be like, come on, do this, do that, do this, do that, and then they're like, do you do that? And you're like, sometimes. But you should do it every time. You can't.
It comes back to us, and you're like,
like, don't ask about me.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's not about me, it's about you.
But yeah, that whole conversation, it just makes me think about the way we look at Montessori as well, and that it's much more about actions than it is objectifying it and naming it, and that it's much more about living, breathing, doing these things. And that's kind of, just the best example to be for children and, for ourselves. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
It makes for happier people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Zainab, I know you've got your children as well, and but is there anything else you would like to share to everybody?
No, I'm incredibly pleased to be speaking to you and to be part of the Montessori Everywhere. I've been very inspired by it as well, and I think it's great. It's great to connect as much as possible, because I think sometimes we've all felt like isolation in various forms, and there's loads of ways to connect with people. I've met so many wonderful people like yourself, like from we've never met in real life.
Met on social media. So
exactly. It's a quite strange at first, but I think if you can harness that, the world becomes a lot smaller, even as it was small already. And I've loved talking to you. It's really nice to take a bit of time out of daily life to just reflect on a few bigger questions.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I just love all the insight you've shared and the wisdom. I think everyone's going to really enjoy listening to all of that, and you've told us so much, and so thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if anyone wants to connect with Zainab, she is on #the Montessori Studio on Instagram, and I believe you have a website as well.
Yeah. So at the Montessori Studio is the tag on Instagram, and the montessoristudio.com is my website. So that's got all contact. Yeah.
Great. It's been a pleasure, Zainab, and
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day, and speak to you soon, I'm sure.
Speak to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.